listed as items 1, 3, 4, and 5 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal to the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the local planning appeal tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. The comment sheet is available at the door for anyone wishing to submit written comments on these amendments. Excuse me?
How many days for the official plan amendment?
It's changed. That's why I say it now. Did you want it? It's not like something we have in our control. It's 120 days? And it's 90 days. 90 days for receipt of the planning. Oh, this is an inside joke. Okay. All right. So when I spoke previously and said maybe we could beat everybody else coming to committee, I can tell you that we do have regrets from Councillor Brockington is at the airport this morning on city business, and Councillor Shirelli is not here. And Councillor Hubley, I haven't heard from him, but let's face it, he's very busy. Okay, and Councillor Blais is here, even though you're not seeing him because he's behind you. All right. Any declarations of interest? Confirmation of minutes from the meeting on September 26th. Carried? Okay, so we'll be holding item number 1, which is the zoning floodplain mapping updates phase 3. We have 3 speakers now. Item number 2 is the memorandum of understanding between the City of Ottawa and 801 Albert Street, Inc. We have 2 motions. This is absolutely good news. Did you want to introduce it before the motions, Ms. Nedden? Did you want to, Ms. Nedden? Yeah, just because it's significant.
Madam Chair, staff is very happy to be here with this report today. I think this is an excellent example of cooperation and working with our private sector around providing affordable housing. And I think this is a significant move forward and step for Ottawa, and I can see my housing colleagues in the room today, and I think we're all very happy about what we've been able to achieve with this particular file, and we're more than excited. And the work that we've done with the ward councillor, Councillor McKenney, is here as well to certainly speak about what's going to be happening in her ward on this front for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so we have 2 motions. One is to include the comments from and that's your motion. Are you moving that? Would you like to introduce it?
Thanks, and this is on behalf of Councillor McKenney, and reading over her comments, I just want to say that I'm fully in agreement with them. Whereas report AC, etc., details the intent for the City of Ottawa and Trinity Developments to enter into a memorandum of understanding to address the issue of affordable housing at 900 Albert Street. And whereas ward councillors can submit comments to be included in reports, therefore be it resolved that the following replace the text of comments by ward councillor section of the memorandum of understanding between the City of Ottawa and 801 Albert Street Inc. report. McKenney's comments as follows: I am pleased to see this investment in affordable housing by Trinity Developments and thank them for the ongoing deliberations to arrive at the amount. However, this MOU is also evidence that the City of Ottawa needs a strong inclusionary zoning policy to ensure affordable housing is provided in all new developments. Communities and the city should not be required to fight for affordable housing funds to be supplied retroactively. An IZ policy would have achieved more affordable units within a site in close proximity to rapid transit. The community expects that these funds will remain within the vicinity of 900 Albert and will help to continue to provide affordable housing units in this community to contribute to transit-oriented development around the new LRT stations. You want the second motion?
Yes, go ahead.
And then also on behalf of Councillor McKenney, there is another motion, whereas report, et cetera, recommends that council delegate the authority to the general manager of planning, infrastructure, and economic development to enter into a memorandum of understanding, whereas the MOU between the City of Ottawa and 801 Albert Street Inc. outlines that a price of $1.25 million has been agreed upon for parcels 1 and 2, shown on the attached document, and whereas through site plan control process, 801 Albert Inc. has agreed to provide $6.25 million towards affordable housing in the City of Ottawa, and whereas this is a generous contribution from this development towards meeting the needs of providing affordable housing, and whereas rents and average home prices in the city continue to increase at a rate higher than inflation and is becoming more unaffordable to households at or below the city's 40th income percentile, and whereas the city's centralized waiting list for social housing now exceeds 12,000 households, and more efforts need to be made to provide affordable housing options, and whereas through the sale of Parcel 1 and Parcel 2 parcel of adjacent city land, there is more opportunity for this proposed development, the tallest in Ottawa, to contribute to these broader city goals and needs, and whereas the city has revenues of $6.5 million included in the budget for the sale of lands from both Surplus Lands and Ottawa Community Lands Development Corp., and at the end of September there was $5.2 million of the city's $6.5 million target in revenue received, and whereas the sale of 900 Albert Street would see another $937K from the $1.25 million sale added to these accounts, as 25% would go to the housing reserve in accordance with the Housing First policy, and whereas without the funds from this sale going to the land sales accounts,
I know,
sorry,
like,
Scott,
you know, like
there
I
will be a
should have
larger
had
deficit at
Vice
year
Chair
end,
Tierney
which will
move
have
it.
to be covered by funds from this tax stabilization reserve, and whereas the city's disposal of real property policy states that all city-owned real property is a corporate asset, and monies received from the disposal of any real property shall be deposited to the city's sale of surplus land account unless otherwise directed by City Council. Therefore be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend Council approve that to allocate the full $1.25 million from the sale of to affordable housing, that one requirement 1.4 of the city's disposal of real property policy be waived, and that monies received from the sale of these lands described above to 801 Albert Street be directed to affordable housing.
Next time you want to move something, ask somebody can wrap it up a little bit tighter there. Just get the point across.
He also
listen.
didn't read my comments as friendly as I'd written them.
You didn't even
I
have
thought
to
I
say
sounded
anything.
friendlier when I was writing
Yeah,
them.
exactly. So we are only looking at consent items and ones we can get rid of, you know, and just have people leave and not stay. On this, does anyone have any questions, or could we just deal with this one now with the two amendments? Is everybody good with that? Yeah, wait a minute, I'm just asking. Yeah? Okay, so on the first amendment, which was to include the comments, which of course the comments were well read and excellent, into the report, is that carried? And then the second one was with regard to the transfer of the money and the recognition for the, in this case, Trinity, and their contribution, and recognizing the community and tying the money to the community. Is that carried? So on the item as amended? Carried? Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming, Councillor McKenney. Thank you for, I felt like I was at GCTC. Just saying. Item number 3 is 2140 Baseline Road, and it's a zoning bylaw amendment. We have any speakers? Yes. Oh, hang on. Matthew McGillicuddy is here from Foten. Do you need to speak if we don't, if we're prepared to carry it? Okay, good. Is this item carried? Carried. Thank you. Item number 4, zoning bylaw amendment, part of 3718 Greenbank Road. I'm pretty sure we have nobody here for this one. They'd have to find it first. Jamie Posen. Jamie, you don't need to speak if we don't need to. Okay, thank you. Is this item carried? Thank you. Zoning bylaw amendment, 350 Terry Fox Drive is item number 5. It's in Canada North. We have, if necessary, Robert Tran from Wesley Clover and Greg Winters. No comments if not necessary, if we're prepared to carry it? Thank you. So the item at on Terry Fox, 350, is carried? Perfect, thank you. Item number 6 is the Federal Land Initiative, 715 Mickinac Road, being Block 21 of Wateridge Village, opportunity to acquire land for development of affordable housing. This is really good news. We're all really pleased with this. I don't have anyone, I don't think, to speak to it. Is this item carried? Yeah. Like, you take it and run with it, if you have a good sense, okay? Those are my rules, okay? Okay. Okay, so we have a motion to waive the rules, to consider a motion that Councillor Leeper, I think, is it Leeper that's moving it? Leeper's moving on behalf of Councillor Fleury. Are the rules waived? Okay, and we'll deal with that after we deal with item number 1, which is the first held item. And we'll go back to this. This is floodplain. Zoning floodplain mapping updates, Phase 3. We have a few speakers on that one. First speaker is Tim Chatter. Tim? Everybody has 5 minutes each. We did receive some communications on this. I'm sure you've all read them.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I believe that there was some discussion with staff about an amendment to deal with map 4 of the urban area, dealing with the area along Campo Drive extension. And my client was just asking that the floodplain mapping not be included on that because there's already a holding symbol in place to deal with the approved subdivision.
Who's your client?
Minto.
Did you hear that, Mr. Wise?
Yes, I did.
And your comment with regard to since there's a holding symbol, why do you have to have a double whammy?
With respect to those areas, Madam Chair, staff concurs that the holding symbol is more than appropriate. There is no need to place additional burden. In particular, the particulars of this particular application and these particular areas is that they have gone through exhaustive detailed design, exhaustive technical study, and so staff are of the opinion that there is no risk to the city or to the area with respect to not in placing the floodplain, and that the holding zone provides adequate protection, Madam Chair.
So we have actually a technical motion that Vice Chair Tierney is going to read. Well, you're going to, yeah, I know you're going to. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Madam Chair. It's a technical thing. There's a beautiful graphic on the back. Therefore, be resolved that map 4 and document 2 be replaced with the attached map 4, which does not apply the floodplain overlay to the subject land, and be it further resolved, no further of notice provided pursuant to Section 3417 of the Planning Act.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Thank you. Yeah, and thanks, Mr. Wise. And Lorraine, what's your last name? Stevens? Thank you. I do have your name here, Lorraine Stevens. Okay, next up is Greg Winters. First of all, for CM Developments, and then for FRP Properties. I don't know what either one of those stands for. What does the CM stand for?
I apologize for my handwriting. It's actually CU Developments. That's Clarigen Uniform
okay.
together. So they filed a development application on the west side of March Road in Canada North.
Okay. Go ahead.
So I'll be brief today, Madam Chair. We were looking at the CU developments. We've got an active subdivision application and a rezoning application on file with the City of Ottawa. We're getting very close to draft plan approval on that file. And we've been having ongoing discussions with the Conservation Authority with respect to the floodplain mapping and stormwater management and the creeks in that area. The creek in particular that I want to speak to today is known as Tributary 2 that runs through the middle and heart of the development. And as through our the CDP process that was approved by committee and council here at City of Ottawa, we had proposed that we were going to relocate that Tributary 2 through this subdivision process, and we have designs that are conceptually in with the City of Ottawa now to show that realignment. The floodplain that is being shown on today's mapping in the report is reflective of a technical study that the Conservation Authority did a number of years ago and has been adopted by their board. The problem that we're having with that technical study, and I don't want to get into the details of the technical natures of it too much today, but the problem that we're having is that the floodplain modeling that was used by the Conservation Authority is based on a floodplain that allows for the entire development of the area. So it's assuming that all the houses are built in the modeling. However, because of an interpretation of the policies, the Conservation Authority were obligated to look at it as if there's no stormwater management, which is an anomaly. We're not going to be doing that in this process. We have an approved EMP, an approved master servicing plan that shows there's going to be stormwater management ponds, and in fact, we've advanced those detailed designs to the point where we're making final submissions for draft plan approval to the city on that basis. So the issue that I'm having today is that we're putting mapping in place through the zoning bylaw and further entrenching a regulatory limit that is going to change in a very short amount of time through another process with the City of Ottawa, and isn't even reflective of what the final floodplain mapping should be, because we're moving the creek and also we'll be building stormwater management ponds. So what I was hoping through this process is that we could defer imposing that other layer of bureaucracy on it and allow the process to flow through its natural course and allow us to zone that through the zoning amendment application that's already been filed on the property.
So Lorraine and David, are you aware of this? Have you given it any consideration in advance, or is this something that you'd like to take away and report back on before it goes to, this item goes to council on, yeah, Councillor Gower's liking that idea, on the 23rd of October? Would you like to have that time to comment on it?
Madam Chair, I think it is advisable that staff have the opportunity to meet with Mr. Greg Winters and also with the MVC as well too, and understand exactly what the implications of this. We're mindful that if there is a development application that's coming in shortly that might affect that, then there may be other opportunities for the risk to be mitigated from the city by a different means, and so we'd certainly like that time to explore that.
That sounds good. Okay, on your next one, is that, what does that stand for?
So this one's Kanata Research Park. So this
Okay.
is KRP Properties in the Kanata North Business Park. They have the predominant amount of land holdings in the Kanata North Business Park. And as I was staring at the map for CU developments, it caught my eye that their properties, 3 of their significant development parcels in the Kanata North Business Park, designated employment lands in the official plan that we're proposing and currently marketing for buildings that are upwards of 250,000 square feet, significant job creation in Kanata North, are now in the floodplain.
Okay.
So this slipped through the process, and again, we're like, let's work with the CA. We understand the regulatory mappings in place. Give us the time to work through the process to resolve that before adding another layer of mapping to this that we'll have to correct down the road. These sites cannot be tossed away. They were approved in 2000. They're registered blocks on a plan of subdivision, and they need to remain as development parcels.
Okay, that's significant too. So we have, anyone have any questions for Mr. Winters? Okay. Yes, Councillor Moffat?
So in both these cases, it's the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority? Did you?
Yeah, through the chair, it's both in the jurisdiction of the Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority.
So during their process, because I mean, this is the end of the when it comes to Planning Committee and Agricultural Affairs Committee, it has already gone through an extensive process, consultation process, meeting with landowners, working with the various authorities to deal with these before it actually finally gets to us. So it's not like it's news to anyone as to what's happening by the time it gets to this point. So did you work with the MVCA on this when these came up?
Through the chair, we didn't give the opportunity. These weren't active development applications. Our clients are marketing these sites behind closed doors, and they would come to us as development consultants when something came forward to look at the development opportunities in the site. So we didn't have it on our active radar to be looking at the mapping. CU development was different because we had an application in the process of the City of Ottawa. We were already engaged. It was only by accident that I happened to notice the mapping the other day and bring it to my client's attention, and then they gave me direction last night to appear here before you.
KRP would have been notified of the floodplain mapping.
The assumption is, like, I've looked at the public consultation record, and I'm not going to debate that city staff did have numerous public open houses. There was a website. There is notice that apparently went out. But being a large corporation, I don't know whose desk this might have ended up on. I can't even presume as why they wouldn't have brought this to my attention to say, hey, we've got a development site. They certainly would have noticed that it was a problem if it had been brought to their attention.
It's just
So-
difficult because like private homeowners don't necessarily have the luxury of having someone like yourself come and speak on their behalf at committee like this, and yet private homeowners are the ones who are largely impacted by floodplain mapping if it's manipulated by a larger group and a larger landmass, because ultimately it's like
Yeah.
it's like a bathtub. If you take water to one side, it's got to go somewhere else on the other side. So it's, you know, the risk here to everyone else in that watershed is that if something happens here, it's going to cause a further floodplain issue elsewhere.
Through the chair, in both of these cases, there has actually been significant study for the floodplain mapping in this case. I think it's just a matter of topography. For all we know at this point in time, the mapping may be suggesting that there might be 1 inch of water on the KRP sites, for instance. The Canada North instance for CU developments, it's even better. We've done our own modeling. We're working with JF Sabourin. We're working with DSEL Engineering, who are doing the applications for Vailcraft and for Minto across the street. So we have full confidence that the small amount of area between our sites and leading to the Ottawa River are not going to be impacted by what we're proposing today. It's just a technical issue that we just have to work our way through to resolve.
Yeah. We have one, the one that we heard from Vailcraft too, that is a different conservation authority. It's the Rideau Valley, right? So, no, it's still the Mississippi one as well? Okay, so I want that one included. Councillor Gower?
I guess it's part comment and maybe staff can clarify, because I don't want to share incorrect information. I think we should be very, very careful as a committee, as a council, to start playing around with floodplain mappings and technical reports around floodplains. I think we're putting ourselves and residents and landowners at significant risk if we start changing things. This is an extensive study. There have been many steps in the process that Mississippi Valley Conservation Authority and their experts have gone through. We also sat at Agriculture and Rural Affairs last week and heard from several landowners with similar concerns. And what we told them was there's a process. If you have a concern about the floodplain mapping, there's an appeal process. There's a process where you can hire your own engineer, and I think we should be applying the same criteria here. But maybe staff could just very quickly, at this point, if any landowner, a corporation or a resident, has a concern about the accuracy of the floodplain maps, what is the process for them to raise that at this point?
Madam Chair, the floodplain mapping is from the conservation authorities. In this case here, the floodplain mapping is board approved by the conservation authority. So you're right, it has gone through a rigorous technical process. With respect to amendment of the floodplain, it does need to go through the conservation authorities as well too, in order for them to review and assess what the implications of that would be. You're indeed very correct. There are indeed upstream and downstream implications of these, and there are certainly an awful lot of technical studies that need to be done in order to ensure that the capacity of the floodplain is maintained. What staff do with respect to development reviews is, as part of the development application process, whether it be through a subdivision process or through a site plan process or some other development process, where it involves the floodplain, is staff would require rigorous, detailed, and technical studies to understand what the impact of that site would be, and also to ensure that that development is actually interfacing with the conservation authority and having those discussions with them as well too. When a development is fairly early in the process, staff generally do like to see that floodplain zoning in place to provide that additional protection, again, to manage the risk with respect to the city's interest as well too. It's certainly in no one's interest to have additional risk exposure put out there. As the development moves its way through the development application process, begins its process of technical studies and working its way through and providing far more detail on what is happening with that site, then that level of risk gets attenuated, becomes managed a little bit more. For example, the motion that you have before you today with respect to the Arcadia lands at Feed Mill Creek, that has gone through exhaustive technical studies, and so staff can be comfortable in that case by saying that the floodplain regulatory layer in zoning is not necessarily needed, because we have other mechanisms in place that can support that. Where an application is earlier in the process, again, those protections don't exist. That level of detail doesn't necessarily exist. There is a process by which, through a development application going through, can apply for a lifting of that floodplain amendment as part of that development application. And again, staff would look at that and decide whether or not that needs to be lifted, could be lifted entirely and would be supportable, or whether there might need to be additional holds put in place to ensure that there is still a restriction on development until the final permits have been obtained. So in this case here, what Mr. Winters has pointed out is there are a number of detailed technical studies that are incoming, the status of which staff at the table here do not know. So we'd like to have an opportunity to have the conversation with Mr. Winters and also with the Conservation Authority and understand what the level of detail is that they're at, and then to be able to come back to council with a recommendation on whether to continue with the emplacement of the zoning or to potentially go by a different mechanism.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. Anyone else have any other questions? Okay. So we have the technical amendment. So just a minute, Councillor Menard. Just want to, let me finish with them for a minute. Okay, thanks. So that's clear direction that you have between now and council meeting, that we'll expect to get some comments back from you, some pretty detailed comments, I think. We appreciate it. Maybe tie in too, if you can, obviously I didn't attend not obviously, but I did not attend the ARAC meeting, but if you could, tie in some of the comments from that meeting as well, that would be helpful. So on the technical amendment, is it carried?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just want can you just explain to me the technical amendment a little bit further? Is it just a small change that's being made? That's what I was coming to ask.
Well, did you hear, you maybe came in after Mr. Chatter was speaking. That's what Mr. Chatter was speaking about?
Yes,
Is
the
the technical
delegation
amendment has
beforehand?
to do with the map 4? It's best that Mr. Wise.
Madam Chair, the technical amendment, it is a technical amendment because that has gone through a level of technical rigor.
And it has a
Staff
holding
are
symbol.
very satisfied that has already gone through a very detailed technical level of analysis, both with the city and also with the Conservation Authority. And we feel that the holds by themselves provide enough regulatory protection to safeguard that.
Yeah. Okay, so on the technical amendment, as carried, and on the report as amended and expecting the information to follow before council, carried? Thank you. Thanks for coming out. Okay, so the only one we have left, I think, is the motion that was waived on that Councillor Leeper is going to succinctly put before us on behalf of our friend and colleague, Councillor Fleury.
Thanks, and I will put it as succinctly as I can. Councillor Fleury and staff have been going back and forth on ways to manage waste in the R4 study, the R4 area in Sandy Hill, and I think they've landed on a consensus direction to staff, and so I'll ask staff, if Leanne is here as staff, whether they'll take direction, that staff be directed to assess the mechanisms of requiring an indoor garbage storage area for the geographic area of Sandy Hill, covered by Schedule 383, inside the main building for all multi-unit residential buildings, regardless of the floor area, and include options to implement this in the zoning bylaw in the report that's coming back to us in 2020.
David, Mr. Wise, can you come back up to comment on, because it's not my understanding, I don't think that staff does support
I think this is the compromise they worked out. They do not.
no. So on the motion before us that we waive the rules, and Councillor Fleury, this is about your motion through Councillor Leeper that
The direction.
the direction it's going to comment on, and my understanding is staff does not support it. And so we're looking for your comment on whether you support it or not, but also on what the impact is.
Madam Chair, I would say that staff have some reservations concerning it. Staff are mindful that we are currently engaged in the R4 technical analysis as part of the R4 Phase 2, where we are assessing the ability to develop multi-unit buildings, low-rise apartments within the R4 zone. As part of that technical analysis, we are looking at all of the various mechanisms that go into a low-rise apartment, from the garbage and waste management area to the amenity area, building entrances, all of those various structural features. We certainly understand what the implications of removing a certain area from inside the volume of a building in terms of it needing to be compensated elsewhere, either through changes in the performance of that building, either through quality or envelope size, or potentially having those costs passed down to an end user or an end buyer. So certainly staff are mindful that there are implications with respect to the imposition of an additional constraint on multi-unit buildings. However, staff are currently working our way through that, and that is something that staff could incorporate within the boundaries of the R4 Phase 2 in terms of assessing the mechanisms of how that could be done, if that were so desired.
Maybe I can bring some broader context. So Sandy Hill has been under a lot of pressure. Many of you have been on committee for some time, recognize that. Part of the Infill 1 and Infill 2 work is specific to some of the bunkhouse challenges we've seen in Sandy Hill. There is a bylaw now that any new building in Sandy Hill above a certain size is required to have garbage internal. It's working well. But what I've seen is that there's a square footage where it doesn't apply. And we're starting to see some challenges relating to it. So I want staff to do the analysis and come back with the R4 review to look at that specific group. This bylaw only applies to Sandy Hill, and it's already in place for the majority of the dwellings, but we've missed any dwelling that's under 400 square meters. So that's what they'll be looking at, and that's what we'll be discussing as part of R4. I just want to give a direction. And this, again, is specific to Sandy Hill. And we've already given a direction relating to garbage being internal, but not for smaller sized dwellings.
But I think that's what Mr. Wise was saying, that they are looking at it for internally on certain sizes, but you're taking it to any size now. And what you're saying is, say it again, the reason that you said that you think compromise actually, the ability.
Well, Madam Chair, I think the challenge that we have is with an indoor garbage storage area is they all need to be of a certain size in order to be able to move the bins back and forth and to be able to have access. So which means that these rooms are the equivalent of removing about a bedroom in size in terms of that spatial area. That is something that on a larger building is more easily able to be accommodated. On a building that is less than 400 square meters in size, that becomes a more significant portion of that building's floor area. And so the question in staff's mind is what is the value with respect to the benefits and the pros and cons of doing that? And again, what are the unintended consequences of imposing that type of imposition on that internal volume?
Councillor Leeper? And then Councillor Blais?
So I don't want to go down the path of pre-debating whether or not requiring smaller buildings to manage their garbage internally is or is not a good idea. I'm not sure that if it came forward as a proposed zoning amendment, that even I would support it. We have an affordable housing crisis, and adding one more unit into something that might otherwise be a 5-unit building is potentially a good thing. But I don't want to pre-debate today the advisability of doing that. And I think supporting Councillor Fleury in trying to get all the options on the table to deal with a very particular issue in a very particular geography is well worth doing.
Councillor Blais?
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Would this be for new builds? Is that effectively the intention?
Yes, that's right. Any existing building would have grandfathering
Grandfather,
protection.
right. And so what's the concern in looking at the feasibility for new builds if we're already looking at how we're going to handle new builds?
That is something that we are actually already doing within the R4 Phase 2. We understand what the implications of requiring indoor garbage storage area are. Recall that within the remainder of the city, what we passed in R4 Phase 1 was the requirement for a garbage storage area to be provided, but there was an option provided to either have this as an enclosed building, a structure that would be placed in the rear yard, fully enclosed and able to be managed, or inside the main building. So that flexibility was provided to the developer on the basis of their particular site. Schedule 383 and the motion that was passed as part of the R4 Phase 1 restricted garbage storage area entirely within the main building. So that option to go for a different methodology of handling the same problem is not there within Sandy Hill. And so the question again is what is the consequence of that? And what are the implications of that with respect to both the ability for the building envelope to be viable, but also for where those costs are indeed directed, because those costs will be borne by somebody.
Sure. I guess I'm going back to the direction or the motion, whatever we're calling this. It simply asks for you to look at it and what mechanisms would exist, right? It's not saying do it yet. And so I'm wondering again what the challenge is in looking at it.
There are very few challenges to look at it, sir. There are certainly a number of mechanisms by which we might be able to affect this.
What did you just say? Sorry, a number of mechanisms, what?
Well, the direction to staff is to assess the mechanisms. There are different mechanisms by which we could do this. Certainly, if the requirement and the direction is to require garbage storage to be inside the building, there are different mechanisms by which that can occur. There is the upcoming review of the waste management bylaw that is coming up. Currently, that applies to buildings that are 6 units and over. That is one mechanism by which this could be done. Another mechanism could be to require the garbage storage inside the main building. Another mechanism might be to allow for permitted projections to include a waste management area as well, too. So there are different mechanisms by which this might be affected depending upon the desirability of the outcome.
Sure, and sorry, Madam Chair.
No problem.
I think that's the point, though, right? So all this is doing is saying, what are the mechanisms, and how would we do it? Give us a report. Like all we're asking, or all Councillor Fleury is asking for, is to be armed with information so that we can take an informed decision at a future date as to whether we think it's a good idea, one, and two, how you would actually do it. So I'm trying to understand what the problem in that is, I guess.
I think they've been as politically honest as possible, probably.
Pardon me?
I think that they're being, I mean, their staff, they're being as politically honest as saying. I know that there's other people that are, you know, do the work in this area and that, and that are staff, but they're not, you know, they know they can do the work. They're going to come back with what you're hearing Mr. Wise say. It's not going to change likely, because he's given consideration to it. You brought up the waste management plan that's, when's it coming, Scott? 2 years?
Yes,
Waste
next 2
management?
years,
Yeah, so next 2 years. Perhaps that's a more appropriate place to have the conversation about how waste is handled, as opposed to, hang on a second. I'm looking at Councillor Moffat now, as the chair of waste management.
You're just asking if this is a proper thing to look at through that.
I'm just asking you whether that would be
I think that the
considered, is
waste-
that something you're going to be considering during
The
that
solid waste
process?
master plan is going to look at buildings. It's going to look at how we manage, how we handle our waste, and how we process waste, and how we do really everything. I mean, the whole point of the solid waste master plan is to look at every single aspect of waste in this city. So if that includes, you know, containers and how we're looking at storing waste on properties, then we can certainly look at that in that process.
Okay. There you go. Councillor Menard, did you have a question?
Just
Councillor Fleury.
Just to clarify, we're certainly looking forward to both the planning elements and the practical pickup of waste receptacles. I want you to know I sit on CPS, that's bylaw services, and I see the issues of when we don't design things accordingly, how costly it is for bylaw to be there every week, giving fines, speaking to owners. So I'm trying to correct something in the front end. We've done partly, and hopefully I can get your support to give a direction for that we consider that review.
Sorry, Councillor Goward?
So I think we're still on whether we're even going to waive the rules to discuss this, am I right? I'm curious why this has to be discussed today, and why this isn't an inquiry or a notice of motion or even a direction. What's the urgency today is what I'm not clear on.
Just want to make sure it can be done ahead of the R4 review phase 2, which will come to us early next year. So there's a lot of work prior to that, and want to make sure that they include in their workload.
Mr. Wise? Comment on what Councillor Goward just said.
The initial waste management area that was determined in the R4 Phase 1 was as a direct reaction to the issue of bunkhouses. Those were the excessively large, excessive bedroomed buildings that were occurring within the inner city area, particularly in Sandy Hill, but also occurring as well too within Centre Town and the Glebe and Heron Park, and some as well too in Hintonburg as well too. And so when staff crafted the exception to say that this would apply to buildings of 400 square meters and more, it is because staff saw that there was a gap that was occurring between small buildings and buildings that were less than 6 meters that were not covered by the waste management bylaw. And so we wanted to ensure that there was in fact a dedicated garbage storage area to accommodate those large buildings. It was not staff's intention that this would apply to all buildings, that this would apply to buildings that are of a smaller footprint, that are more compatible and more contextual with the neighborhood. That being said, of course, if staff are directed to look at the implications of adding an indoor garbage storage area within that, staff would do so. We are mindful, however, though, that that would require more detailed modeling and analysis of what that implications would be on the floor print, but that is something that staff could incorporate.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to say? So on the motion for direction to consider that as part of the R4, is that carried? Carried. Okay. Anyways, it was good to have the discussion, and we'll see what you come back with. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Fleury. All right. Guess what? We are, I think... Yeah, any notices of motion? No? Any inquiries? I don't think there's any other business. Okay, so we'll see you again the day after council, October 24th. That's it.